Chapter 3. How this thing came to pass, I do not know. I do not understand the inner processes which accompanied it. I had long observed, of course, that when Pan Wiadomski recounted the incidents of what he called his former life in Jerusalem, there was a vivid evocation of the ancient world. But side by side with this, there was something else infinitely more mysterious, namely, an actual touching off of personal memories within me, a stirring of contacts, so that I was gradually drawn out of my present identity, which became weaker and weaker, until it abandoned me altogether, and another took its place, occupied my brain and body and nerves, and transformed me into a contemporary of his world of narrative. Aware of this fantastic transformation, even while it proceeded, I tried to resist. I struggled. I held on to my senses, my immediate surroundings, my foothold in what I have always known as my life. I fought off the arms which pulled me out of myself into a remote and vanished age. For a long time, I was successful in the struggle. My living self stood by me like a faithful guardian. Yet I was aware of a perceptible weakening, for it often happened that when Pan Wiadomski was giving his version of a certain event, a personal memory of it arose in me, and it was so vivid, so intimately my own, that I became feverish with the desire to correct him. There were inaccuracies of fact. There were errors of interpretation which stung me. There were details of which he was ignorant, and which I wanted to supply in order to fill out the picture and restore the true balance. There was a certain dangerous sweetness in this impulse, and I would not yield. But on occasion, when the narrator suddenly confronted me with a question so close to me, the last resistance within me dissolved. It was as though the solid earth had melted under me, leaving me the victim of whatever forces were impressed on me. Why did this crucial surrender occur just when it did? Had the long, exciting day wearied me? Was it the softness and seduction of the spring air which broke all my defenses? The faithful guardian of my living self was no longer at my side. He had been put to sleep. He, too, had fallen into the world which Pan Wiadomski had evoked. There was joy in my surrender. There was fulfillment of an ancient desire to plunge headlong, without restraint or reserve, into the past. What swam out first, most clearly from the dimness of the dead world, was the face of my rabbi, Nicodemon, and from within me there swam out to meet it the old feeling of love, enthusiasm, and boundless admiration which that face had always awakened. Alternating waves of warmth and terror rushed through my heart, as when one beholds, after long separation, the face of one beloved. For my heart had been given to my rabbi in utter love. I saw once more then that round, full, radiant countenance, dark red, smooth, like a pomegranate, or like a sunset star set in the deep blue spring heavens of Judea. It was a countenance that shone with goodness. No cloud of care, pain, despair, or ill will was ever permitted to cast its shadow thereon. Never had I seen him yield to sorrow. No matter what difficulties arose, or what evil filled the times and laid its cruel hand on his heart, there was never an outward sign. That strong, manly face was always bright with faith and certainty. The skin of it was dark and lustrous, and always tended with the finest oils. He was a young man in those days, one in the prime of life, around the age of 40, and the might of his spirit, no less than the might of his body, sang in him. It sang from the broad, full figure, which might perhaps have been considered a little too short in view of its fullness. The locks of his hair hung down like bells over his powerful neck and his high, round throat. But the power of him streamed strongest from the great, black, fiery eyes, which were like lakes set in the fastness of the sockets which protected and overshadowed them. No matter what pain or sorrow or distress tore at your spirit, it was enough to look into his eyes, and tranquility returned. These were eyes which poured forth a sunlight of faith, confidence, and love. They were a source of strength to the hands of the weak. They bound me to him, as they bound all his pupils, as a calf is bound. They made our will identical with his. This is the face which shines now, and will shine forever, in my memory of him. No wonder, then, that when the ancient world became part of me once more, or when I once again became a part of it, the face of my rabbi should rise like a portent before me. Concerning the inner spirit of my rabbi, perhaps this circumstance will serve best to introduce a description. He refused to make of his learning a spade to dig with, that is, a means of earning his daily bread. It was rather a brimming spring, whose waters flowed fresh and free for all that thirsted. In order that he might not exact a fee, however small, for tuition, he earned his livelihood by other means than the Torah. Joseph Arimathea, a man of great wealth, was his friend. He came often to the house of learning where my rabbi taught, and sat down among the pupils to take in with them the words of God flowing from the lips of our rabbi. This same Joseph Arimathea wanted to take upon his own shoulders all the worldly worries of the rabbi and support him in great style. The rabbi would have none of it. He was fond of repeating the proverb, "You may purchase a friend, but you must make a teacher for yourself." He meant thereby that friendship may be bought with presents, but a rabbi and teacher could be acquired only by faith and by following, without offering in exchange any part of one's worldly goods. However, Joseph Arimathea did support out of his wealth the school and a number of the students. The rabbi himself earned his daily bread at a little sandal booth in the lower part of the city. There came to him many distinguished women of the city to place orders with him. They had to have the measure of their feet taken by the rabbi. Some of them were pure in their motives, for they knew that the rabbi, in his modesty, paid no attention to their persons when he made the measurements. Others came because they wanted to gaze upon the beauty of the rabbi, whether or not he paid attention to them, and they came when they were pregnant in the belief that with such a model before their eyes they would bear beautiful and gifted children. But the rabbi did not spend much time at his manual labor, for he gave most of the day to us, his pupils. His needs were few and easily satisfied. He was without children, and this circumstance was a reproach in the eyes of the other sages who held that the rabbi was neglecting the commandment concerning fruitfulness. But his reply was, "A sage and teacher must not hang a millstone round his own neck," whereby he meant, of course, the upkeep of a family. He believed that a sage and teacher must be free to give all his strength to the Torah. When he was asked why he had not taken a wife unto himself, he answered, "My bride is the Torah." He was not altogether singular in this respect among the sages of Jerusalem. There were others, too, who looked down upon a woman as a temptation and snare. They remained unmarried, both for the sake of purity and in order to devote themselves without distraction to the Torah. This they called eternal betrothal to the holy maid. I was the third pupil of Rabbi Nicodemus. The first two were Alexander and Rufus, the sons of Simon Cyrene, who, like Joseph Arimathea, was a friend of the rabbi. Like Joseph again, Simon was in the habit of visiting the house of learning and taking his place among the regular pupils. Other pupils were Hillel the water carrier and Judah Ishkariot, who came with other grown-up men to sit on what was called the footstool of Messiah to hear the lectures and discourses of the rabbi. They constituted a regular band or company which was held together by its belief in the imminence of the coming of the Messiah. Because of my contact with them, I was a witness of and a participant in the great events which came to pass during that Passover in Jerusalem. But before I proceed to a recital of those events, I must first make known certain matters concerning myself. I must reveal who I was, from what manner of house I came, and how it was that my destiny was linked with this company and this rabbi. The place of my birth was the plain of Sharon. Our village lies at the foot of the hills of Ephraim. From the particular hill which overshadowed our village, the plain stretched level as far as the sands of the great sea. In the evenings a heavy dew would fall from the heights and veil in mist the surrounding country. The bronze-colored earth absorbed the richness of the dew and sprouted a thick grass much beloved of our flocks. Thus the rich dew nourished a breed of sheep whose heavy wool was greatly sought after by the dyers and weavers, for it was of the finest thread, as soft and as delicate as silk. Indeed, we felt the effects of this dew even on the locks of our own heads. The greenness of the grass persisted throughout the whole year, but he who has not seen our spring, when the forest-covered hills were adorned with a heavy, delicately woven carpet, has never known what real greenness is. The rich cucumber green of the heights and meadows lay like a glowing shadow upon the neighborhood, and in the midst of this shadow shone, side by side with myriads of anemones, the famous roses of Sharon. Every thorny bush, with its clusters and chains of crimson and cream-white roses, was like a bridegroom adorned for the day of his nuptials. Bands of flowers lurked in beds of green moss and peeped out from under the shelter of the rocks. They seemed to send forth, as they danced in the mild winds, a delicate ringing sound of color. Where the plough had passed, the good, fruitful earth looked forth cinnamon-tinted. In this tapestry of color, our fields lay, sprinkled with colored rocks, dazzling in the adornment of nuptial roses, stretching away until they were lost in the dreamy shadows cast by the forests of Carmel, the boundaries of this part of the country. Westward, the meadows and woods melted into the sand dunes, which were the approach to the sea. The soil of our valley is not only rich in itself, it is abundantly provided with wells. The natural fruitfulness of the earth, which brings forth a juicy and nourishing vegetable growth, is enhanced by the science of our sages, who have laid down rules and laws of sowing and harvesting. The sheep and cattle which feed hereabouts are desired above all others in the land. Equally famous and in equal demand are our wines, which, because of their fig flavor, do not yield even to the wines of Jericho and Cyprus, for they are to be found as frequently as these on the tables of the rich, both within Judea and in countries beyond the sea. God has blessed our valley with the blessing of milk and honey. There were legends concerning the fatness of our soil and the richness of our milk and of our flocks and herds. In the poverty-stricken hills of Judea, it was believed that the sheep of the valley of Sharon pastured on ripe grapes. Honey dripped from the mouths of our cattle, and milk ran without pressure from their overfull udders. Even until this day, I am homesick for that generous soil which fed us with such a prodigal hand. I am homesick for the sunlit afternoons when the shepherds and the workers in the field were wont to lie down in the shadow of the grapevines. I long for the quiet, tranquil evenings, wrapped in the dewy mantle fallen from the sky. Shadowy wings were spread then over the great valley, and from the thresholds of the little houses, where the evening lamps shone, came the sound of flutes piping the song of rest. But the beauty and kindness of this region was also marred by unhappiness, for there was much trouble with these little houses of our industrious workers, especially such as were close to the shore. The sea cast up sand dunes, which crept up like thieves upon the houses. The earth is shifty there, and often the foundations of the houses yielded and melted and sank. We were not sure where and when such things would happen. There would suddenly appear, in what had seemed to be solid earth, a rift or cleft. A vast mouth would open and swallow up whole houses, as happened of old with the wicked Korah and his congregation. For this reason, we do not build large houses, but little ones, like booths, and this is true for the rich not less than for the poor. And though the roofs are very light, they nevertheless come tumbling down upon us. For this reason the high priest has a special prayer on our behalf when he enters once in the year the Holy of Holies, a prayer that our houses shall not become our graves. However, we, the Sharonites, are very proud that we alone are mentioned in a special prayer uttered by the high priest in the Holy of Holies. I grew up among flocks of sheep. How I loved the feel of their wool! How I loved to caress their soft, damp mantles when the dew was thick in them! I would thrust my fingers into the massy tangles, and I would be dragged along when the shepherds drove the sheep to the well to water them, so that often I had to be rescued from their midst. I loved the flutes of the shepherds. I would follow them out into the meadows. I would rest with them in their booths when they took shelter from the midday sun. I would run after a lost or wandering kid. When the time of the shearing came, the festival of the shepherds, I would linger about the pool where the sheep were washed. One sheep would be roasting on an open fire, and the valley echoed with the singing of the shepherd boys. Those are the visions which come back with the dreams of my childhood, interwoven with the damp, dewy evenings which descended softly on the Sharon. I remember my mother only out of my youngest years, when I was still under her loving care. She was always occupied with many tasks, and her hands were never idle. She worked with the shepherdesses, milking the sheep and pressing out cheeses, which were laid upon the roof to dry. She worked with them likewise at the weaving of carpets, which were made of the broad leaves of the palm tree. It seemed to me that I always tasted the sweetness of figs in the cheese my mother made. But what occupied her most was the spinning of wool, in the company of the wives of our laborers, and in between she was busy at the washing of dishes. The labor of bringing forth and suckling many children wore her out, so that I see her still as a sickly woman, with a waxen face and lightless eyes. But from her I drew in, together with her milk, a God-fearing spirit. She was the first to tell me of the temple and of the city of Jerusalem, and she pointed out to me the stars, beyond which is the dwelling place of the Almighty. From her I learned my first verse of the writ, "The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom," and from her too I learned to utter the benedictions for every mouthful of food and every swallow of water. But I was still young when they took me away from the women's quarter to that of the men. Here it was my father who dominated, and who pointed out the ways in which I was to tread, for he was like the pillar of fire which went before the Israelites in the wilderness.